Hi, friends. My name is Pat, and you are listening to the I Used to Think podcast, a podcast about people who are brave enough to change their mind. If this is your first time listening to the show, welcome. We have a unique episode for you today. For the first time in the history of the podcast, I'm the one being interviewed. I had the privilege of being interviewed by Erica from the online community called Weaving Us that is part of the Social Fabric Project. This was started by the New York Times journalist David Brooks. I highly recommend that you go check out their website and consider joining their online discussion. I've really enjoyed connecting with other people who are passionate about bridging divides between communities. In today's conversation, we talk about all my favorite topics. It's a short conversation, but we cover faith and mental health, the reason I started the podcast, and we conclude the conversation with my take on the current cultural context around Gen Z and what people should know about Gen Z. I really enjoyed this interview. I thought Erica did a great job, and I hope you enjoyed as well. Let's get started.
Hello, Weaving Us community. It's Erica, your Weaving Us community guide, with another Feature Friday. And today I'm so excited to have my friend Pat Reed Lee from Anaheim, California. And Pat, I don't want to say that it's the world of Disney or the land of Disney, but you're from Anaheim. So thank you for joining me today.
Thank you so much for having me. And yes, the easiest way to know about my city is Disneyland, so I'm totally fine with that.
I'm glad. So, Pat is a realtor, podcaster, soon to be graduate student, but I think the most important role that he plays is that of a weaver. So, I really appreciate you being here. I want to start with this question. What would you say is your weaving superpower? In other words, how do you weave?
I'd say my weaving superpower is storytelling in a nutshell, both by sharing my story and then helping others share their story. You mentioned earlier that I run a podcast, so it's weird to be on this side of it. This is one of the first times I've been an interviewee. In terms of storytelling, my main avenue is faith and mental health. So briefly, I grew up in a fundamentalist Christian environment, is the best way I could describe it. For those who are familiar, it's a world in which everything is black and white, right? These are the good guys, these are the bad guys. The church is good, the world is bad. Psychology is bad, but faith is good. And a large part of my story has been learning to navigate that the world isn't black and white, it's very much gray. At least that's the conclusion that I've come to. And so my goal is just to be vulnerable about my own story. And then because of my experiences, help others to share their story, especially those who grew up in an environment like I did where maybe faith and mental health doesn't feel compatible. And it's one of the reasons I'm pursuing a graduate program right now. I'm looking to get my master's in marriage and family therapy. And I think that's what a good therapist does. I think a good therapist is essentially a storyteller.
Thank you. And I'm just going to tell you, the world needs more people like you. I love what you said about I'm just going to allow myself to be vulnerable. When we're vulnerable and authentic, oh my gosh, the possibilities are endless. So, speaking of one of the ways that I have actually witnessed your vulnerability, last year, David Brooks celebrated the launch of our online community with a really inspirational talk. And after that talk, I launched a challenge to the Weaving Us community and asked folks to be the first to chat about what they learned. So, Patrick, you won that challenge. You were the first to send a post after David's talk. And here's what you said: I needed to be reminded that political ideology is not correlated with character. I want to be quick to learn, not to prejudge. Your response was so authentic. Suspending judgment to learn about others is definitely a weaving skill. So, how are you living this practice of being quick to learn and not prejudge in your everyday life?
Yeah, that's a great question, Erica, and one that is easier said than done for sure. I think David Brooks is a great example of someone who does that well, and I'm very inspired by his work. So briefly, my podcast, the title of it is called I Used to Think. And in a nutshell, I interview people and ask them to tell me a time in their life where they changed their mind on something. And it is I think a great example of where I need to, in your words, suspend judgment, because I purposely invite people on the show that I may not necessarily agree with, or maybe their story is one in which there's a lot of nuance to it. So I'll give an example. My most listened to podcast episode is with my friend John. John and I have some mutual friends, and we met through some volunteer events. And in early adulthood, John identified as gay. So he was in a relationship with a man, he was active in the gay community, and now he's married to a woman and no longer identifies as gay. And so this is a very complicated story. And I received voices from, various opinions. I received a lot of skepticism even about John's story. And I understand how his story can be used to promote unhelpful ideas like orientation conversion and that sort of thing. But ultimately, I reminded myself my goal with this podcast is not to push an agenda, it's to help John faithfully tell his story. So this is John's story. He doesn't know any other experience. This is what he knows. And my job is to tell it and not to judge it. John, if you knew him personally, he is one of the most authentic, loving people I've ever met. He has no ill will towards people who are gay or any other orientation. And I think we need more stories like this. And I think we need more people listening and being able to share these stories.
I love that. I love your response because there is validity in every story. His experience is just as valid as anyone else's experience. And the fact that you gave him the space to share his story is beautiful. Speaking of stories, I love this saying, everyone has a story to tell and everyone has a story to hear. I want to ask you about your personal story. How are you finding that sharing your personal story is helping others heal?
I think this is the part of storytelling that is the hardest part because it's easy for someone to say they're a storyteller and then tell other people's stories. But it's a whole nother level to open up about your own. And I'm still wrestling through many parts of my own story. I would say a lot of this came to fruition last summer. I discovered the website Substack, which is very similar to a blogging platform. It's sort of the new blogging. And on the Substack, I released my story growing up in Christian fundamentalism. I was also homeschooled by my mom, so very much sheltered and very much in a bubble. I was also influenced by a Christian cult that was popular at that time, and I had a lot of mental health struggles. And I just openly shared that on this article and then posted it on social media. And within not even a day, I had quite a few people open up to me, either online or in person, telling me how much they related. I think my story is unique in that there's a popular word right now called deconstructing. A lot of people of faith are deconstructing their faith. I know it's popular within Christian circles. And my story is unique in that I deconstructed, but I'm still attending church. I still have a faith community. I still have friends and family who believe in God. And I know people who have gone through my story who have completely deconstructed. And honestly, I don't blame them. I know there's a lot of hurt and there's a lot of things to process. So a couple weeks after I released my story, I actually had one woman come up to me at church and thank me for releasing my story. So her and her husband homeschooled and raised their 8 children in an environment very similar to mine and the way that I grew up. And some of her kids now as adults have left the faith community and it's been hard for her. But she was saying that me sharing my story brought her a lot of comfort. I brought her a lot of hope. And I think more than anything is just people knowing that they're not alone. I know there are a lot of people, maybe with not the exact details with my story, but who have a similar story. And I find that the more detailed I am about mine, somehow people can actually relate more.
That vulnerability and willing to share your pain. When we go through any type of healing journey, we can't heal without walking through that pain and acknowledging the hurt that we have received. So kudos to you for making yourself vulnerable and sharing your story and leading others to the path of healing. So we have a community approaching 1,000 weavers. Super excited about that.
Congrats.
And they're weavers looking to weave with people in Generation Z. Now, you are in Gen Z. So, what should weavers keep in mind when connecting with Gen Z?
I really appreciate you asking this question. It's something that I think a lot about and something that I told you earlier before we started this conversation. I'm sort of an anti tech Gen Zer. I think in many ways, I look at my own generation sort of from an outside perspective and try to get a sense of where we're at and why we are where we're at. I think to answer your question, I'll tell you about a conversation that I had with a relative, is actually my wife's uncle, and he's been a therapist for 30 years now. So I was on the phone with him, for one, just getting advice about the field and the industry from him. But he mentioned that after being a therapist for 30 years, he often comes across young people who their biggest struggle is often motivation. They struggle to get their career off the ground, or they're struggling to be able to find stability in life. And my relative said often we frame young people as being entitled or lazy, and that's the reason they struggle with motivation. But he pointed out that in almost every single situation where he met a young person like this, there was an underlying woundedness that needed to be addressed, an underlying hurt or obstacle or hurdle that was leading to this. So technically, I'm an older Gen
Mm.
Zer. I was born in 99, which is not that long ago, but within the Gen Z pool, I'm considered older. And so I've been working for a few years now. But most people in my generation, they spent end of high school and almost all of college just surviving a pandemic. And I think a lot of folks in my generation have watched, I guess you could say, the curtain being pulled back from institutions, political parties, corporations. They've sort of seen the raw and real human nature of not only our country, but of the world. I'm in Southern California right now. I'm a realtor. The average single family home in my city costs about $1 million right now, which is absolutely insane. So I think because of all this context, most of us struggle
Oh,
to think about the future. I think it makes sense to me that a lot of Gen Zers, we focus on the now. How can we take care of ourselves now? How can we take care of our friends and our family? How can I just enjoy life right now? Things like pensions or social security checks, these are things that we're not honestly considering because of the environment that we've grown up in. So we've been passed down a very complex and different society. I won't say that it's objectively harder than every other generation. I didn't grow up during the Great Depression. I didn't grow up during the Cold War. There are so many things that I'm glad I didn't grow up in. I think as Gen Zers, we would really appreciate the patience and the encouragement of others and the acknowledgement of the world that we've been handed, the society that we've been handed down. Not in a way that I'm not blaming anybody else. I'm not saying that this is unresolvable, but I think that acknowledgement can go a really long way. Just as someone from another generation, if they grew up in the Great Depression, it totally makes sense to me why they would want to save money. It totally makes sense to me why they clip coupons and, try to save every last penny. I think this acknowledgement is really important.
thank you so much for that context.
Yeah, thank you, Erica, for being a part of this community. And I mentioned to you maybe a couple weeks ago, it's not easy running an online community, and I think you've been doing a great job. Thanks for listening. And as I mentioned, if you're curious about the work being done over at Weaving Us, I encourage you go check out their website. I'll put a link in the description. And if you would be so kind to leave a review of this podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen. Also, go follow us on Facebook or Instagram. Thanks again. Until next time, peace.